So I just want to get a couple of, ask you guys a couple of questions before we start in terms of this subject about peace and war on the planet. How many of you would say you are peace activists or have been active in peace issues in your lifetime? Quite a number. Is there anybody here who has served in the military or served in a war? Okay, quite a number. Okay, is there anybody who has actually been in a war? Been in a war in another country, or been a victim of war trauma, like been a member, had been okay. That's really important if you've actually seen and participated in the violence of war. I think that's an incredibly formative influence in people's lives. Okay, let me tell you about how I come to this issue myself, because as I was telling Stuart before we started, that I'm literally passionate about this issue. Before we start, let me just fill in my biography a little. I actually am a psychiatric mental health nurse. I've been a psychiatric mental health nurse for 40 years, and I still am. I work at Harborview on a psychiatric unit. And a year ago, I started my own business, which is called A Joy-Filled World. And it's committed to making a shift in how we talk about and approach peace on this planet. And the blog, Peace by Design, is part of that business and I will talk more about that at the end. Now, I have had this fascination with war and violence and genocide and Holocaust and all of it, and it's a passion that has not left me and has preoccupied me, and it's grown stronger over the years. And finally I decided I have to follow my bliss, and that's finally why I decided to create a business out of it, and I started it a year ago. So there are a couple of questions that have fascinated me my whole life. And observations. One is that human beings appear to have a universal longing to see peace on the planet. You hear people talk about it all the time, but yet we never seem to get there. Inevitably, despite our yearning and thirst and hunger for peace, somehow we inevitably get derailed on the way to peace by war. So, what is it that makes us fall back into war over and over again? In 5,000 years of recorded history, there have been 14,500 wars, approximately. So that comes out to 2 or 3 wars per year of recorded history. So, which makes peace look like a little breath in between each war. So the question I come up with is, what is so compelling, alluring, or even addictive about war? Is it a habit? If it's a habit, why are we so habituated to war? Well, if it's a habit, then maybe we could break it. But the question would be, what kind of world do we truly want to live in? Another way to say that would be, what would be so compelling a vision that we would stop this habit of war in order to get that future or that vision that we would choose to stop this compelling habit that we have. And Stuart also said, you seem pretty optimistic about it. Well, human beings stopped the habit of slavery. We still do it every once in a while, but we stopped that. And I believe that when you have a vision that's compelling enough for a future, human beings can do what they set their minds to do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So, how did I get to that place that I could even be optimistic about this? Okay, where do I come from? I'm the child of military parents. My father was an Army colonel who served in 3 wars. I grew up in Austria and Germany post-World War II. I was a little kid playing in bombed-out houses in Salzburg, Austria, and in Würzburg and Kaiserslautern. And I used to play in this bombed-out rubble. And I would see, this is from 1950 to 1954, and I would see German men walking around without their legs or without their arm or burned face, and I would say to my mother or our German maid, look at that man, he only has 1 arm, he doesn't have a leg. And they'd say, shh, don't point, don't talk about it. So you weren't allowed to discuss it, you weren't allowed to talk about it. Yet on the other hand, my parents would point to a house or a building and say, our bombs hit that house, our Air Force hit that, we hit that. So I was getting mixed messages all the time that our army did this, our army did that. And it was a very conflicted message. And one of my marked memories as a child was we had German maids in our house. And one day I came home from school and there were all these MP vehicles and what would be the German FBI vehicles outside our house. And my parents said, get in the car. And my father was in the car and my mother, and they said, you have to go with us. And long train of cars went off to like a sort of a German ghetto, and it was the maids was accused of stealing from us. And I was cowering in the back like this. I was so embarrassed. And they were going into the maid's house to find the things that she'd been stealing from our house. And they finally came out, all the German neighbors came out to watch. And what they found was a can of corn, canned corn, and my sister's old discarded doll. I was so embarrassed, I just hid on the floor and cried. And what I saw was the American presence the victor had become almost like the oppressor or the perpetrator. And I hated the American military from that point. It took me years to forgive my father and to forgive the American military for that action. Now, the 50s were full of pictures you go to the movies, atomic bombs. If anybody remembers this, duck and cover. Then Khrushchev banging his shoe, we will bury you. Then came the civil rights movement. Then came Vietnam. So those are the formative influences on my upbringing. By the time we got to Vietnam, my father was sick with cancer, and he was home and he was dying, and something had obviously gotten to his brain, and he was rabid with anger, probably because he was dying, but he had become a very, very extreme conservative, and everything was, if you're not pro the war, pro Vietnam, you're against me. And by then I was very anti-Vietnam. So I was like not wanted in this family because I was talking anti-Vietnam. So these are the influences I grew up with. And as I grew into adulthood, I went to nursing school, and my father died when I was 18. I began to realize that I had grown up in a very unhappy and dysfunctional family. I was reaping I was going to say the benefits, but the fallout from having grown up in this highly conflictual family. And I was very depressed, and it took me many years in psychotherapy to recover from having grown up in that family. And in fact, I actually had post-traumatic stress disorder, which I later found out was due to sexual trauma that occurred in my family. Now, the great thing about this is that I had fabulous therapy, and I did recover. The downside of this is that for years, all I did was do therapy and go to work. And I was not a political creature for all those years. I just really focused on trying to have a life and trying to recover from all of this. The worst part of this is that I was disowned by my family. I was told, you're not one of us. You're different from all of us. You don't belong in this family. This is part of the fallout in this family. Now, what was all that about? I told you my father was in 3 wars. The first one was the Mexican border conflict when he was 17 years old. The second one was World War I. The second one was World War II, the Great War. In World War I, I have since found out from my siblings, my father was in those famous trenches of World War I. He was buried alive. He almost did not survive. In World War II, he was at D-Day. He saw incredible action at D-Day. He was also in the, what do they call the Battle of the Bulge, in that northern France into. I've since found this out. When I was a teenager, I hated my father. I couldn't go near him, but I have found this out later. And he was at the opening of at least one concentration camp in Germany. And I have also found out he was in the Signal Corps. My father was at the Nuremberg trials, and it was his unit that took the pictures of the Nazis that were executed at the Nuremberg trials. So when I was a kid, about 8 years old, I found these pictures in a suitcase at home of these dead men lying on biers. They looked like the pictures you would think of from, mafia killed. And I thought my father had done it. But only as an adult did I find out that those were the pictures that they took to confirm that the Nazi war criminals actually had been executed. So these are the formative influences of my life that somehow told me this are the costs of war. And I now believe that my father had his own post-traumatic stress that affected him post the war. Now, there are men who love war, who absolutely love war. I'm going to read you something. There's a scene in the movie Patton. And this is from a book called A Terrible Love of War, which I'll talk about later. And the general walks the field after a battle, churned earth, burnt tanks, dead men. He takes up a dying officer, kisses him, surveys the havoc, and says, "I love it. God help me. I do love it so. I love it more than my life." Anybody who wants to create peace on this planet has got to deal with this issue of the love of war. And I believe my father was one of those people who loved war. This is a man who almost died and suffocated to death in World War II, World War I. And yet, there were consequences for him that he never had any way to deal with, and consequences for our family. Now, I have done extraordinary work in my own recovery and forgiven my father completely, so I can stand before you and say, I love my father. It's taken me years to say that. And I can tell you now that I have totally healed with my siblings who disowned me for 16 years. Of all my life achievements, having healed with my brother and my sisters is the greatest achievement of my life, reconciling with them. It's unbelievable that I was able to do that. I used to joke and say that my family is like Bosnia. Whoa, it was bad. Those are the consequences of war in my family. Now, if that's the consequences of war in my family, what are they in other people's families? I can only guess. So, I came out of this family after very successful psychotherapy, around about early 90s, beginning to come alive and beginning to ask questions. Where are we? And the real thing that made me begin to become political was the Gulf War. If you remember the Gulf War, there were gold ribbons all over Seattle, people that were here then. The Gulf War was a very popular war, and for me it was incredibly disturbing. I mark it as my political awakening. I was disturbed when I heard the first President Bush say things like, I can't remember exactly, but let's go and kick ass, something like that. And I was ready to go and do demonstrations and do marches and those kinds of things, but there was something about this of going and demonstrating, peace demonstrations, that did not feel right to me. And I remember that there was a peace demonstration where people went on to I-5 and stopped cars. And people in those cars that got stopped were furious. And it stopped me, and I went, nuh-uh, I can't do that. There's something deeply wrong about this. This is a very popular war. People are trying to support the guys and women who are fighting that war. I found that I could not do the standard peacemaking things of petitions, marching, and demonstrations. It did not work for me. And I had to find another way to express myself that was congruent for me. It worked for other people, but it didn't work for me. So I searched and searched. It was my first political act. And what I decided to do was to take mediation training. And I became a mediator. And so what we're really talking about here, dropped my notes, was to find another way to express myself politically. So this was my first foray into peacemaking, and I have since realized that this was the beginning of my path into transformational peacemaking. Now, I now believe that this standard, what I call traditional peacemaking of marching, demonstrations, petitions, all that, is a viable peacemaking option. The problem I have with it, here's what it is. It's a call to action. It's to tell people there is some problem here. Wake up and look at it. The problem I have with it is that it is, in the long run, ineffective at change. It doesn't result in lasting change. That's the problem I have with traditional peacemaking. Okay, so as I continue to look at once I finished psychotherapy and began to come out in the world, my passion continued to mushroom and grow. I began to also look and study. I began to see other issues in the world of politics, international arena, war, violence, genocide. What I call the next big disconnect is that in the world of the military, national and international affairs, diplomacy, there's a huge disconnect between what's known in the world of, say, psychology and sociology, conflict resolution, and how the geopolitical realm is run. You would never know that at the United Nations or the White House or the Department of Defense or the State Department that what they know about in the world of psychology exists. Finally, at the Veterans Department, they're understanding post-traumatic stress disorder, but they don't understand that conflicts, especially multi-generational and cyclic conflicts, are caused by human beings who are hurt and traumatized. Remarkable. Particularly, you can really see this in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Traumatized people who are hurt repeat conflicts over generations because they have a story about how they got hurt. And it gets passed down over generations, goes over and over and over, one generation after another. And it's incredible to me that international leaders don't see this, that they don't make this transfer. And I call it the micro-macro disconnect. Human beings on the individual level profit enormously from the learnings of psychology, sociology, but it doesn't transfer to the macro level. For the first time this year, there's going to be a presentation at the American Psychology Association on large-scale group psychology. First time, large group psychology. Wow! So that is amazing to me. So the next big piece of my journey has been when I encountered transformation. Now, we know about transformation, the butterfly who was in a cocoon, caterpillar, then suddenly they're a butterfly. It means radical, sudden change. When I finished psychotherapy in '96, my life had gotten a great deal better, but I never really had happiness. And from 1996 until 2001, my life was okay, but I never really had the joy and happiness I knew I could have. And it wasn't until 2001, when I did a transformational training at Landmark Education, that I discovered that it was possible to really have true joy in living. And since then, I've been doing transformational workshops of one after another, and my life has just been, whoo, taking off like that. And what I have discovered is that this concept of transformation has been perfected and improved and refined at the individual level, the family level, and the group and organizational level for the past 35, 40 years. And there are other organizations have been doing this as well. Byron Katie is one. There's a group called Almas, the Diamond of Heart Place. There are different organizations that have been doing this work. But as far as I know, nobody has taken it to the level of international work. But I think it's the next level. I think that's where we need to go. So I am extremely excited about the possibility of taking transformational work to the international level. Why is this so? Okay, what is transformational work applied to an international level? What do I mean by transformational peacemaking in particular? Well, there's a couple of kind of core pieces to this. Transformation, core pieces of transformation means giving up blame. Giving up making people wrong. It's a core piece of it. Totally giving up this idea of enemies. What would a world be like if we didn't have enemies? If we gave up making people wrong? Republicans and Democrats, they're the bad guys. Can you imagine what Washington would be like without making people wrong? Another part of a key part of transformation, as it would apply particularly of all transformation, is what's called completing the past. Now, if you think about creation of anything new, creation of art, writing, drama, anything, it starts with a blank canvas. Anybody here is a creator of anything? Did you write or paint or anything? You have to start from a blank canvas. So, in the world, the way I've just described some of these cyclic conflicts, it's complete reeking of the past. All these stories that people have of what's been done to us, particularly with war. All these memories that people have of the injuries of the past. I just finished a book called Bombing Civilians in the 20th Century. This book is harrowing reading, harrowing, of the fire bombings of Tokyo and Dresden, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, chilling, awful reading of what the United States in particular has done. 100,000 people burned in one night in Tokyo. Just incredible. We did that. So, is it any wonder that there is huge memories and resentments and fallout that people have of what's been done in the past? So if you wanted to really create peace, you would have to get to a clean canvas. You would have to complete the past. You can tell that the Holocaust is not over because so many people still have memories of it and it's still alive for them. So, if you really, truly wanted to create peace, you would have to get to complete zero. Everything would have to be complete. I wrote a blog on this. It's called Being Complete with War Itself. How would that happen? People would have to say everything that there was to say. All the memories would have to be shared. Can you imagine if my father, who had almost suffocated to death and had memories of who knows what, how many things he saw, had been able to have a place to share everything he'd seen and witnessed and experienced in war, had a place to share and complete all that, then maybe the violence he did toward me might never have taken place. Perhaps there might have been love expressed in that household. Might have turned out very differently. So, if humans wanted to create peace on this planet, we would need to get to a blank canvas. It would be called completing the past. And from that place, we could create a new future. So that would be creating something brand new. And perhaps it would have something like creating a future that our children, great-grandchildren, and future generations would really want to live into. A place where they could, a life where they could dance and play and create a life really to celebrate, where people could live into their creativity, they could restore the earth. Did anybody read the new book by David Corton? I just read it. I heard about it when I was here 2 weeks ago. It's called Agenda for a New Economy. And he concludes that book with his vision for what could be on this planet. It's a fabulous book. And what he talks about is people living in on a restored earth where they have restored the land, created new soil. Oh my God, I get so excited reading it. New trees, new growth, and people living in communities that are connected to each other. How exciting. Children that are happy, that are playing. Kids that live into a ripe old age and their parents get to see them grow up and get married, and they don't have to worry that their kids are going to get killed in wars. How exciting would that be? How thrilling. That's a future to live into that actually turns me on. Now, I don't believe that people who serve in our wars, who actually create those wars, who lead us to war, are bad people. I think they're just people who don't realize what they're doing. I actually don't think they're bad. So that's what I have to say to you today. I just want to paint a vision of what could be on this planet if we decided that's what we wanted to do. And there are actually people who are doing transformational projects out there in this vein. There is the Organization for International Cooperation, which my friend Arnie Kaiser runs on the East Coast. He is getting people at the State Department, at the UN, to do transformational communication programs so that they actually know how to talk to people in their work in ways that lead to cooperation. Whoa, far out. The Israel-Palestine project, I don't know if people who know about that conflict, that the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narrative about their histories are radically different. And they have written a common narrative that puts both those stories together into one narrative that respects and honors both sides. It's a new story. That's a transformational project. The Compassionate Listening Project that we talked about is about deep listening to people. The signature idea of that is an enemy is someone whose story has never been told. That is a transformational project. And Landmark Education that I talked to you about is doing an extraordinary project in South Africa with the Lan Min mine, platinum mine, with 350,000 people. Transformation with 350,000 people. That's the people who work in the mine plus all the surrounding communities. It's a massive project. So people are doing some exciting things. And this stuff is just at the very edge of what is possible. So I want to open this up to questions, but I just want to tell you about two things here before we open it up. Yeah, what are we doing here? I'll tell you about two books here. The thing I read to you about the General Patton movie comes from this book, A Terrible Love of War, which is by James Hillman. This is what I would call the traditional paradigm about war. This is an incredibly important book in which James Hillman shows you the forces that keep war in place. It's very powerful. It's hard to read. But wow, we have our war. The idea is that war is eternal. It'll always be with us. And it outlines the powerful things that keep it in place. Hard read, but whoa. This one, The Three Laws of Performance, is a book by one guy that works at Landmark in the Vanto group, the business group, and another guy named Dave Logan. It seems like it's a business book, but it really is about the kind of core pieces of transformation, the theory, and it just came out, and already it looks like it's going to be on the bestseller list. Very easy and accessible reading about the core pieces of transformation theory. This is the new paradigm of what might be possible. So, old paradigm, new paradigm. Both books, incredible. So, I want to open it up to you. What do you think? The website address is www.peacebydesignblog.com.